This is Listening with Franklin Livingston, and our guest is Ethan Raysor.
So, one of the teachers finally understood
Yes.
that you needed special support or help,
Yes.
right? But in the community, like your parents were connected to these churches, and I'm assuming actively.
Yeah,
So,
very much so.
wasn't there any kind of indication somebody got from you or your brother that you guys needed some more attention or help?
I think because my brother was more visible and like he has and had more of the hyper activity in terms of like not being able to sit still, constantly getting up and being disruptive, because I was taught out of that and I was taught that if I act like that, I'm going to be reprimanded, and especially with my dad physically so. I didn't want to get hurt. I wanted to keep myself as safe as possible, so I would sit down and figure out the best way to stim so that I wasn't disrupting other people. Most of the time, that came with me tapping something or shaking my leg, and then someone would yell at me and call me annoying, which then only put me further into my head. Um, and I think that's when people from the community started saying to my mom specifically, um, that like I think there's something wrong with him. Like in terms of socially. Like I wasn't relating to peers enough. I wasn't trying to connect with kids the same way my brother was, but my brother was allowed to show these things and be somewhat accepted without being overly reprimanded for it, you know? Whereas I was taught from a very early age to hide those things and to be more like self-conscious about it all. So in ways the community helped my brother get closer to having a diagnosis that made sense for him and have more support for him. And in other ways they saw my problem as being he's just not very social. He doesn't like being out with other kids. He plays by himself on the school playground. So I had teachers that would literally put me with another kid that was obviously like neurodivergent or autistic in some way, and like we would now be friends. And I was like, I don't even know this person. Like I don't I'm not mad at being friends with them, but I'm also not friends with them. Like they care about like Dungeons and Dragons and I care about Disney. Like
But
it's not the
because you
same.
had some sort of similarity,
Right.
right?
Yes, because we were outside. We weren't on the in group. We weren't part of the neurotypical kid and the presentation of that neurotypical kid group, you know?
I did not know that schools can do that too. I mean, I never heard of such situation, but I know some religious institutions. Uh, you remind me of two stories I have.
Go for it.
One, I went to a gigantic shopping mall kind of church in Illinois
Mm-hmm.
because everybody was like, "Yeah, it's a cool place to go and all that," and I decided to go there too. Uh, and I was greeted by the ushers, and they asked me about my background. Now I wasn't sure what they were asking. I thought they were asking like, "Where are you from?" Usually, like, "Are you from this city or that city or which suburb?" But they were more interested in knowing my racial background.
Mm.
And upon asking, they told me because they have sections. So they have a section for Asians, they have section for Southeast Asians, and
Yep.
in the same stadium type place. I personally did not like it. Now I don't know what reasoning they had behind that, but I thought that's wrong, right?
Yeah.
I should have freedom to sit wherever I want to sit.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they wanted me to sit with people who would look like me
Right.
without caring what if somebody was like fresh off the boat person might have different values than me or
Right.
interests, like you're saying, like somebody might be Disney fan or not. But no, no one cared about those things. So it's surprising to hear that a teacher would do that too, because in my mind, a teacher is very learned person, is smart,
Yeah.
might have more social intelligence or social intelligence than a person like me, right?
Right.
And but why would they do that in your mind?
Um, I think a lot of it comes with almost like a pity thing where like they want us to have a community and they want us to feel connected with somebody else. So even
But
if
somebody else, sorry to interrupt, who is like you,
right,
right?
yeah,
So a community within a community,
yeah,
right? And I see that happening all the time, and
totally.
which is too. So I don't go to social events because I've learned that you go to a social event, and within 3 minutes you'd see groups being formed there,
Oh yeah.
right? These are hipsters, these are classics, these are Wall Streets, these are like artistic type. But I don't know if that helps the wider community.
Yeah. I personally don't think that it does, but I think it's also part of our human nature of wanting to fit in and be comfortable. And I think one of the things that is so different about neurodivergent people is that our comfortability level is not based on external things all the time. It's based off of our internal feeling. And if those internal feelings are not being met, we're not going to have a good external community because we're not being engaged in the way that makes us feel good, regardless if this is a way that typically makes everybody else feel good, you know? Um, and for instance, like sensory processing disorder, um, it's not a official diagnosis yet because it's very hard to create a metric that they can use to make a formal diagnosis with, but it's especially common with autistic people, and it's being more noted in people with ADHD as well because it creates such intense feelings. And these are things like things being too loud, things being um, too bright, things being too dark. These create natural um, responses in everyone. But the intensity of the emotion that comes with it is what separates it from being a normal behavior and a behavioral response to it. Like when I have too many sounds going on, I get so frustrated that I just start being nasty to people. And like it's not something like if you knew me at all, that's not how I behave. That's not how I like to talk to someone else. But if I'm trying to listen to one thing, another thing's going on, a third background thing is happening, and then a really loud sound happens, I'm one of the most miserable people to be around because I simply cannot process all of these different things happening around me. And it took me a really long time to be able to even put that into words because no one talks about it that way. No one talks about how these intense feelings aren't just intense feelings that you have and you need to get over them and they're just feelings. Focus on something else. When you are incapable of doing that, it creates a huge problem for the world around you. And um, one of the stories that I have that I really wanted to share is going to theme parks because theme parks are huge sensory overload places for everybody. You know, like no one goes to Disney World and is like, oh my God, I loved all of the people around me and all of the sounds and everything was just so amazing. No one says that about that specific part. They talk about the rides, they talk about the experiences, they talk about meeting characters. But for people with sensory processing disorder, you don't get to focus on all of those things all the time. You are instead focused on all of the people that are around you and the fact that you can't get out of a space easily. That's one of the big things for me. I get very claustrophobic when there's a small space and hundreds to thousands of people all around me. I hate it. And I start breathing heavy. I started having a panic attack. And then that panic attack, because I'm trying to hold it in and mask that so that other people around me aren't getting worried about me, I start to get a shorter and shorter temper. And that shorter and shorter temper translates into me being nasty to people around me. And that's not a fun experience for anyone, including my family members that just want to be there and have a good time. Um, and Disney has this access pass called the DAS pass, and it's disability access services. And um, it was it's an imperfect system, and they made it somehow harder to get one. Before, we would just have to go up to a cast member when you entered a park, and you would be given a pass that is good for 60 days. And you would just have to explain delicately what your situation is and why you need special accommodations. Usually, I would just have to say, I'm I've got ADHD and sensory processing disorder, and that was that. They were like, "Here's your card. No worries. You don't have to go into detail." This most recent time when we went in November, they redid the entire structure. So now, instead of going to a guest relations person when you enter the park, they have you go onto an online Zoom call with a cast member. This cast member is not uh, a doctor,
Right.
is not a medical professional by any means. It is a person that is working probably a minimum wage job at Disney and has to wear a shirt that says cast member on it and a cute little badge. And they have to listen to each person's disability and give them a yes or a no answer, as well as take a huge log so that in case they get in trouble, they have enough information about what your disability is and why they gave you one.
So,
Um,
so a person who might not have a high school education is assessing you
yes,
whether or not you have.
a qualifying disability.
Wow.
And it was really rough for me because I was not prepared for this change. I was told that there is a change, but online it's very vague about what the procedure is. So I was expecting to pretty much do the same thing as I've done before, and maybe just have to like talk a little bit more about it. I had to go into extreme detail about what my sensory processing disorder is. I had to answer questions on what I do in my normal day to day life that um, allows me to function and how that is different than being at an amusement park. I had to talk about things that worked for me, and then I had to list all of the things that didn't work. And for people that are adult diagnosed ADHD, you tend to have a lot more of a history of things that didn't work than things that do work.
Right.
And usually those things are things that are considered vices, like uh, a overly sexual hyper fixation on sex drive, um, as well as substance abuse, alcohol abuse, tobacco and marijuana abuse. Like, there's a lot of things that adults that are diagnosed with ADHD have done to try to get to a place where they understand themselves and feel comfortable that necessarily a child with ADHD has not been exposed to yet. And having to expose myself like that to a random stranger on a Zoom call was not fun, especially after I did all of that and they then asked me to simulate a panic attack for them.
Wow.
Um, yes, and they didn't um they didn't say that that was not what it was, but they said in order to get your pass, I need you to be able to like give me as much information as possible. And I was already 20 minutes into a 35-minute conversation with them, and I was like, okay, fine. Like, I can't leave the line. Okay, so I'm going to start hyperventilating, and uh, then from the hyperventilation, I'm going to probably have this problem, and then I'm going to start acting like this, and then by the end of the day, nobody's going to want to be around me, and you're going to have a lot more people upset with guest services than liking you right now. And thankfully, after I went through and had uh, for lack of a better word, staged panic attack for them, uh, I was able to get this pass that was now only good for 8 days.
Wow.
And most Disney vacations, especially when you do a resort, are 10 to 15 days. So I could not imagine, thankfully, we were only there for 5, but like, I could not imagine having to redo all of that just because we decided to have a family vacation that was longer than 8 days. When originally the passes were good for 60 days. One of my friends who lives in Disney, well, doesn't live in Disney, but lives in Orlando, and a large reason why she moved to Orlando was so that she could be closer to Disney because it's one of her comfort spots. She used to have a continuous DAS pass and stopped seeking them out because of how much they changed. It doesn't make sense for her anymore to have to do that every 8 days when she goes there multiple times a month. Um, and thankfully she's able to afford like the higher like membership and everything like that. But for someone that does not live in Orlando, it makes no sense to spend that much money
Yeah.
on a pass that you use for less than a fortnight. Like,
Plus, it's one that keeps going up.
yes, exactly. So
I think the thing which I personally hate about a lot of the renowned institutions, doesn't matter entertainment or what, they can get a lot more out of you which you don't want to share.
yeah,
In general, if you have power over these people or institutions, you would never tell the things they ask you to share.
yeah,
And we end up doing it because when we need them, they know it.
exactly.
And that's very sad, but that's the way it is.
Yeah. Like for this trip, what was I going to do if I stopped that conversation right when I started feeling uncomfortable, which was about 10 minutes in, again, to a 35-minute conversation, whereas before it would be less than a 5-minute transaction. Um, I was thinking to myself the whole time, like, if I don't get this pass, it's going to significantly impact the rest of my vacation with my husband. And we were there with one of our best friends and her daughter, who is also one of my dance students. And um, I did not, by any means, want to get angry at her because she's a 12-year-old child. And like, that's not fair to her to mar her Disney experience because I'm sensory overload and cannot process what's going on around me, let alone have her singing popular and other Wicked songs the entire time we're standing in a line, like for hours. That just was not going to be something that I could do and feel good about. So they knew that for me to have a good time, I was going to have to continue on with this conversation. And I was going to, for the rest of the people in my party to have a good time, I was going to have to continue this conversation. So they know exactly what they're doing when they do it. And I understand why they decided to make it harder to get one because people could be abusing it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, with the amount of money that they have, the amount of money that they make, and the amount of people that are coming in and out of those parks every single day, what is the big end goal here? Like,
Right. And maybe there are other ways too. For example, I wasn't really planning on jumping onto this conversation, but say, sometimes they'll say that get a certificate or letter from your medical doctor in advance.
yeah.
So you know that I'm going to go on this trip. I should have this document,
Mm-hmm.
and it verifies or it states that I have this condition, so I must be given this kind of treatment, right?
Right.
Or pass in this particular case.
Right.
But going back to the thing you were talking about in intensified emotions.
Yes.
So driving, like even here, driving is crazy now. It has changed.
Yeah.
And
Horrendous.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes I would see people behind me just honking for nothing. If I am driving where the speed limit is 35, I don't want to get a ticket.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if the person behind me is expecting me to drive 45 or 50, I am avoiding that. But
Yeah.
people will honk at you,
Mm-hmm.
and that creates emotions.
Yes.
Sometimes I feel like I should get off the car and tell them, hey, what's wrong? And then you run into road rage. You don't know who the person is.
Yes.
It seems to me that we as a community are losing patience. I have
Yes.
seen a shift in people's attitude on the road, in grocery stores, and space, sharing the space. I don't know how many people care that apart from having a condition, some people are a different basing than the others.
Yeah.
Right. Because of the age, because of the health condition, because of the gender, there are a lot of issues.
100%.
But what if we consider those things? And I don't know if we are going in the right direction, especially when I get to the city.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the New Yorker in me comes out every time I have to go to the city and I make my way and I have my headphones in so that I can block out and choose what distractions I have and what stimulus are occurring. But even still, being stuck in a small tunnel coming from the train into Grand Central Station, that creates a high level of anxiety for me. And that anxiety comes out in a lot of different ways sometimes. Um, I don't like having to yell at somebody who's pushing me, but in that moment, I absolutely will turn around and say something not nice to whoever's doing it because I'm so far out of my comfort zone that I am now also getting this extra physical stimulus that you're going to hear about it now, and I understand how that's not always the appropriate reaction, but also pushing somebody in a crowded space is not a appropriate
I was
reaction
going to
either.
say that.
Like
Yeah, who knows? Somebody could be pregnant.
yes.
Elderly can fall and break
Yeah.
their hip. A young person might be going through something.
Yeah.
So
And there's
the person
plenty of
pushing,
developmental problems that
yeah,
you cannot see. And unless you are a doctor and you can tell, oh, that person has a developmental issue that, like, if they bend the wrong way, their joint, like, pops out.
right.
You don't know that unless you are qualified. And being in a situation where you're just willy nilly pushing people, like, what is the end goal here? Are you really just trying to push your way through the crowd and, like, come out on top? Or are you going to try to be part of the larger group, and wait your turn? Like, how hard is it for people to wait their turn? And that's coming from somebody who has a problem with lines and waiting their turn. Like, if I can figure out how to do it and do it in a way that isn't disruptive, quote unquote, to other people around me, then a neurotypical person on the subway should be able to do the same thing, And I
When you say neurotypical, means a person who doesn't have anything diagnosed.
yes, or doesn't have uh developmental like cognitive disabilities like ADHD or autism.
But they could be crazy.
Yes, they absolutely could
A lot
be.
of people are crazy in the city.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But that comes down more to who they are as a person and not necessarily
I want to
how they
talk to you
behave.
about something, especially a very interesting background. Uh, and you also work in a very interesting field in dance and acting and choreography.
Yep.
Now, when these habits, now I'm not talking about people with particular condition, pushing,
Mm.
uh, just being an ass, just being crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obnoxious, and a lot of these people we see on the subway, we see in the city, and then bullies
Yes.
pushing and taking on the space, the way people sit, spitting, and it leads to a lot of other stuff. Where does things go wrong? Where does the developmental stage become negative? I'm still trying to find words that I know Conway will pick up the best. The moral formation of any human being.
Mm-hmm.
What do we leave out? Whether we are parents, teachers, leaders like church leaders, Sunday school teachers, where do we are wrong, or we leave out things that people end up becoming crazy?
I think it comes from a lack of empathy and compassion. At the end of the day, people that are taught and have compassion and empathy ingrained in them usually do not act or behave in those ways.
And whose responsibility is to teach empathy and compassion?
All of us, we're all responsible for that.
When you say we all, but I will, because in childhood you had more struggles.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about childhood too, like when a kid is born
Yes.
and being raised from that stage onwards.
I'd say early childhood that is more up to parents and their larger community, meaning like grandparents, aunts, uncles, you know, family connection. That that's where empathy and compassion start. But once that child starts going into the public sphere and they have to interact socially with people, that's when the things start to shift. And it's not just kids their own age that may or may not have been given the same opportunities to learn empathy and compassion, but also the people that are supposed to be teaching that and engendering that into them. Um, I think that is one of the biggest places where the churches that I went to didn't do the best job at that. Uh, and I had to learn the hard way through kids bullying me and other parents bullying me or my parents about it. Um, that's where the empathy and the compassion are supposed to be there, and they're not, And um, I don't want to put any more pressure onto public school educators because they've already got so much that they've got to deal with and not getting paid nearly enough to do it. But they also have a responsibility to teach empathy and compassion as well, although it is a lot harder to do so without connecting it to some kind of larger spirituality or religious base. For the most part, religious teachers and leaders are able to do that within their own confines of their own religion and teach that through the religion, whereas public school teachers, they don't have that base text that says treat others as you should be treated, and especially here in America, we're trying to go away from putting God and Christian values into public school education, which I think is a great thing because they should be separate entities. However, it does make the job harder when a teacher is or is not Christian, has to try to teach students not to bully one another because they're different, or not to bully a child because they came from a different country and are now being immersed in American culture and have no idea how to survive on their own, and I think that's that's where it starts becoming more of a larger and larger sphere of people that should be caring about how empathy and compassion are being upheld. I think we want to focus so much on like loyalty and lying and cheating and stuff like that, but all of those problems have a root problem with empathy. They all have a root problem with compassion. So why aren't we focusing more on those things instead of all of the problems that stem from them? You know, like we have a huge problem right now with hate against Muslim people. We have a huge problem with hate against Jewish people. We have a huge problem with hate against LGBT people. We have a huge problem with hate against brown people. There's a common problem here, and it's hate. And where is the hate being accepted? And why is hate being normalized? Why isn't compassion being focused on heavier so that this problem of hate and how it grows is being taken out and having like a word the adversary? You know, these are things that we can't necessarily touch, but they're all things that we can feel. You know, it may not be something that I can physically put in front of a child and be like, here, you have to learn this, but they're all physical actions that that child is picking up every single second. You know, they're always learning new information and they're always learning something from the world around them. That's part of the reason why I love art so much, because it allows me to express my deep well of compassion and love outwardly so that other people can take that in too, you know? And the last thing I want to do is make hate the thing that people take away. Even if they hate how I perform something, I'd rather them hate how I performed it and love the art than hate the art, hate the person, hate the things that the person represents, you know?